Chapter 21. Don't tell me you forgot about it.
Raon tapped Wrath, who was floating on his shoulder. The King of Essence is the monarch of Wrath, who rules over Devildom.
Icy blue air radiated from Wrath.
It was a bone-chilling coldness. The King of Essence has not lied once since it came to existence. The King of Essence and you are bound by a contract called Bet. The rewards will be given, even if you don't want it.
So don't worry about it. Then give them to me already. I'm asking you one thing before that. What? How did you pierce through the pointy-eared bastard's pressure, and how did you copy that arrogant guy's martial art? Wrath's question was exactly what Raon had expected. Give me the rewards first.
All right. Once Wrath's blue flame fluttered like a butterfly, messages appeared in the air.
You have won the bet against Wrath. The rewards are being handed out. All stats have increased by 2. Raon bit his lip in ecstasy as the increase in stats washed over his body.
However, there were still more rewards.
A random trait is being generated.
The perception of the snowflower, 1 star, has been generated.
Perception of the snowflower? Raon tilted his head as he looked at the trait's name.
A trait too good for your insignificance has been chosen.
What does it do? It's an ability that increases the range of your perception.
Since it is 1 star, it will increase the range by about 10%.
10%.
If Raon could perceive 10 meters around him, then it would become 11 meters with that trait. It didn't look like much, but if the range of his perception increased, then the trait's use would increase accordingly. The King of Essence could perceive 10 times more than his original perception.
I see.
When he thought about it, they also had 1 star attached to it. That signified that the trait was going to develop, just like the trait Ring of Fire.
That's pretty good. Raon nodded.
As an assassin, perception had been more important than power. As such, he was satisfied with a trait increasing his perception range.
But why is it called perception of the snowflower? It's my personal taste. Just respect it.
Ha! The frozen flower bracelet was his taste, and now the name of perception of the snowflower was also his taste. His taste really sucked.
Since the bet with the King of Essence is over.
As Wrath was about to approach him, a new message appeared.
You have achieved your first victory in a bet with Wrath.
The title First Victory has been created.
The title's effect has increased all stats by 1. Damn.
Despite being unable to see the status window, Wrath could see the messages. His jaw dropped.
You damn rat.
How dare you steal the King of Essence's stats once again?
I didn't do it, your system did it on its own. Also, isn't 1 point nothing compared to your main body's abilities?
Of course.
Then it doesn't really matter.
That's true, but...
Wrath awkwardly rolled his eyes, then sighed. Alright. It's fine. It's your turn now. Tell me your identity. Don't wanna. What?
What did you just say?
I don't want to. Raon shook his head with a straight face. Are you mocking the King of Essence? You said you would reveal your identity. I didn't say anything like that. I only asked you to give me my rewards first.
Wrath's jaw dropped as he recalled exactly what happened.
Isn't that right? I never told you I would answer. Raon slightly smiled. I shouldn't tell him about the reincarnation.
In order to explain how he used the expertise of the assassin Raon, he would have to tell him about the reincarnation. Since he couldn't predict what Wrath would do, he couldn't let him know about his reincarnation. Same goes for the Ring of Fire. On top of protecting and developing the mind and body, the Ring of Fire also had the special ability of identifying the flow of martial arts. That included other people's martial arts, on top of his own. That's why he was capable of copying Baion's Void Tiger Fist during their duel. Of course, it was only possible because Baion's achievement in the Void Tiger Fist was lower than his Ring of Fire, which was enhanced by the status window. Anyway, Raon had no intention of giving any information to Wrath to begin with.
Because he is an enemy.
They had gotten a bit closer, but Wrath was still aiming for his body and soul.
He couldn't give him any information, no matter how small it was. You made a fool of the King of Essence. Wrath couldn't hold back his anger anymore and radiated icy flames. Raon felt the pain of tens of thousands of ice knives piercing his skin. But I can endure it.
It was a relief that he met Wrath after obtaining water resistance. If he didn't have water resistance, or if Wrath's affinity was fire, then he would have lost already. Suppressing Wrath's coldness, which was filling his heart with emotion, Raon smiled.
You never learn. Attacking me when nothing else is happening will only result in your loss. Shut up. Wrath's flame became even more fierce.
The coldness penetrated his bones, and his limbs started to tremble.
Whap!
The coldness in his mana circuit was activated by the excessive external stimulation, making it extremely painful.
Phew! Inhaling slowly, Raon used his ring of fire.
The pain began to subside.
What a brute! How are you even withstanding it? Willpower. He casually responded, though his insides weren't the same.
It was difficult to hold on, despite having the ring of fire and water resistance. If he didn't have the experience from his previous life, or he went through all that hellish training, he would have fainted already. Gritting his teeth, he endured it with everything he had. At that moment, a blue window appeared in front of his eyes. You have displayed extreme willpower in facing Wrath's attack.
Agility and stamina have increased by 1. When the messages announcing an increase in stats appeared, Raon's mind and body were filled with vitality.
The coldness pressing down on his mana circuit also started to subside.
Damn it! Wrath cursed and left his body.
His anger was the same, but he realized he was hurting himself by doing that.
Just who the hell are you?
The King of Essence has never witnessed a human like you, not in the entire history of humanity.
I'm not sure, either. It wasn't a joke. Why was he reincarnated? Why was he born as a Sieghart, and why was he paired with Wrath? He didn't have the answer to any of those questions.
Don't underestimate the King of Essence, who will reveal your identity at all costs and consume your body and soul.
As I keep saying, do it, if you can. Raon smiled and sat on the bed. The goose that laid the golden egg did an excellent job, once again. By the way.
Raon's eyes, directed out the window, wavered coldly.
I wonder what that is.
Inside the central martial palace, where Karun Sieghart dwelled, a room that looked like the definition of splendor was completely silent.
Ugh. Bayan Sieghart, who had been standing straight for almost 4 hours, started to groan.
Karun, who was sitting at the desk, finally looked at him.
Bayan Sieghart. Yes. Since Bayan hadn't spoken for hours, his voice was hoarse. What was my command? It was to become the top trainee. And you also asked me to not lose to anyone. Correct. I wasn't asking much.
I just wanted you to get first place, after winning against the girl from the Sullian family and trampling over Raon. Karun's eyes burned red in anger.
And yet.
Not only that girl, you also lost to the son of the insect that dropped out of the direct line.
In front of everyone, at that.
The low and cold voice resonating throughout the room made him feel like his heart was being crushed.
How much will you disgrace me? Do you want to become like the third or the fourth? No, not at all. Bayan kept shaking his head, trembling. He didn't want to become like his 2 older brothers, who weren't even mentioned by name anymore. You've already lost your first chance.
Karun's eyes didn't contain any hint of delight at seeing his son after such a long time. Only anger and irritation existed.
I am aware. Bayan couldn't meet his intimidating gaze, biting his lip as he looked at his feet. The top trainee will be chosen again once basic training is over, upon trainee graduation. Bring me that title. Yes. Bayan swallowed and responded as if he was spitting blood.
If you want to live as a part of the direct line of Sieghart, don't waste your last chance.
Karun waved his hand, signaling him to get out. Thank you. Bayan couldn't even look at his father's face properly, despite not seeing him for 6 months. He left the room while lowering his head. Damn it.
After leaving the central martial palace, Bayan punched the wall while screaming.
It's because of that bastard. He gritted his teeth. Since he was used to being complimented, his father's admonition affected him even more.
And the fact that a mere insect like Raon was the cause of all of it made him even angrier.
Ha!
He sighed, trying to get rid of the irritation filling his heart, but he didn't feel any better. Trying to refresh himself, he started to wander aimlessly.
Why am I here?
When he came to, he had arrived at the 5th training ground. The door was closed, so he went over the wall.
It's as expected. Bayan sneered.
Despite the entrance door being closed, the doors to the indoor gymnasium and locker room were all still open.
Stupid instructors.
He curled his lips and headed to the locker room.
When he was about to close the door, he noticed the locker with Raon's name on it.
Murmuring that he was only going to look, he opened Raon's locker.
It was neat inside. There was nothing except a box at the bottom of the locker. Why is there a box here, huh? Bayan's jaw dropped as he looked inside it. What's with this number of shoes?
The box contained training shoes with the bases either worn out or torn off.
And there weren't only a few of them, but over 10 pairs of them. He did this in 6 months?
He examined the shoes in disbelief, but they all had the same shape and size.
They were all Raon's shoes. Ah! Bayan gasped.
He was also supplied with training shoes, just like Raon. But he had only replaced them twice.
How does this make any sense?
The fact that Raon had replaced his shoes more than 10 times, while he had only replaced them twice, was difficult to believe.
This is crazy.
Looking at the shoes, which looked like they had been worn for several years, he felt like he had been hit over the head with a club. The shock was much greater than when he was scolded by his father.
I feel like I just woke up from a dream.
Once his head cleared, he remembered the facts that he'd been trying to ignore. The fact that Raon arrived at the training ground earlier than anyone and returned later than everyone. The fact that he never gave up training, despite sweating heavily and breathing frigid air from his mouth. The fact that he kept running alone in the training ground after night fell, after his stamina training in the indoor gymnasium. While I've been superficially swinging my sword and resting in the dormitory, he's been surpassing his limit every day.
That was the reason that Raon's spirit was better than any other temporary trainee. This is how a real Sighart should be.
Among everyone in the 5th training ground, the one who was the most suited to being a warrior of Sighart was Raon.
On the other hand,
He scorned and mocked him, and without being able to accept the results of the test, he disgracefully lost to him.
Coo! His face grew red in embarrassment.
He hated himself for all the dirty and disgraceful acts he had done, blinded by his envy. After sitting in the locker room for a while, he lifted his head. His green eyes were brimming with determination, unlike when he entered the training ground.
Never again. What had already happened couldn't be changed. Not repeating the same mistakes was the important part.
That was what a Sighart should do, and what he was going to do from that moment on.
Ha!
Breathing out deeply, he got rid of his selfishness. His steps as he left the training ground were as light as rimmers.
2 days after he returned to the annex building, Raon's routine was the same as when he was at the training ground.
From daybreak, he started running around the annex building, and he trained his strength without any equipment after breakfast.
Since he spent his time with Sylvia the day before, there was only one being that would bother him. Are you training again? It's boring. Perform some cute tricks for the King of Essence.
Ignoring the whining wrath, Raon was about to keep training.
Before he could, someone came to visit him. I am Ren, the head butler of the Lord's Manor.
He was a kind-looking old man, with half his hair dyed the color of a cloud. The head of house has summoned the young master.
He bowed respectfully. Did you say summon? Why me? It's to award you with a bronze tablet. Raon frowned.
He'd thought the tablet was just going to be delivered, but he was personally summoned instead.
Huff. Sylvia, who was inside the building, ran over to the window. Sir Ren.
Lady Sylvia. Since they obviously knew each other, they bowed at the same time.
Did the head of house personally summon him? Indeed. By any chance? Nothing bad will happen. It's just an awarding ceremony, after all.
Ren smiled kindly to ease her worries.
Raon. It's okay. I'll be back. Raon dusted off his clothes and put on his outer garment. Wait. Change before you go. It's fine like this. Glenn was inherently a warrior. He wasn't going to dislike him for coming in the middle of his training. Then let's go. Ren smiled and walked ahead.
Raon gestured to Sylvia with his eyes and made his way to the Lord's manor.
Raon's hands trembled as he looked at Glenn, sitting on his golden throne. Meeting his eyes alone, in the audience chamber large enough to fit hundreds of people, made his mouth dry. Is he bragging about being slightly stronger?
I want to stab his red eyes. Of course, the crazy Wrath was different. I shall keep my promise, whether I like it or not. Saying such an unnecessary thing, Glenn gestured at Ren.
Yes.
Ren slightly nodded and brought the bronze tablet shining faintly.
Thank you. Raon accepted the bronze tablet from Ren. The Zighart's emblem, a burning sword, was engraved on the middle of it. I'm awarding you with this bronze tablet.
By returning the bronze tablet, you can ask for an equivalent object or request.
Then, can I do that now? Raon looked up to Glenn, holding his tablet.
He'd already decided how he was going to use the tablet.
State your will.
After a moment of silence, Glenn nodded.
Sylvia Zighart. How can I return my mother to her original position?
Since they didn't expect him to say that, both Ren and Glenn looked down at Raon with wide eyes.
By original position. Are you implying her position in the direct line? Yes. Glenn closed his mouth.
He surveyed him from head to toe, trying to figure out his intentions. Raon felt like his heart was being crushed, just from his gaze alone.
Accomplishments. By accomplishments, you mean?
If you achieve an accomplishment that the entire family will acknowledge, then it is not an impossible feat.
So, you're implying that it can be done. Correct. Glenn nodded.
He continued with a slightly brighter expression than before.
However, it's almost impossible. Being acknowledged by multiple people is more difficult than plucking a star from the sky. He lifted the corner of his lips, as if he were mocking him. It looked like he was certain that Raon couldn't achieve it. Insolence.
If the King of Essence had his main body back, he could kill him in a few thousand bouts.
Wrath glared at Glenn with burning eyes.
However, a few thousand bouts meant that he was a powerful opponent, one that would be difficult for Wrath to manage.
Then I don't need it. Raon gave the bronze tablet back to Ren. Thank you.
Getting accomplishments was something he'd done as often as breathing in his previous life. Resolving that he would return Sylvia to her original position, no matter what mission he had to accomplish, he stood up.
Wait.
When he was about to return, Glenn's voice could be heard from above the platform.
You didn't state your requested reward yet. Pardon? You only asked a question. That is something that can be answered without a tablet.
When Raon turned back, Glenn was looking at him with the same cold eyes. However, something unspeakable seemed to have changed.
What is it? He'd never thought Glenn would say such a thing. Since he thought Glenn would take the tablet back no matter what, it was rather unexpected.
State your wish. Raon's eyes shone, looking at the bronze tablet that Ren was holding.
The next wish is already decided too.
He'd already thought of what he needed the most, after the question about Sylvia's restoration.
The aura cultivation technique.
The Ring of Fire was certainly an eternal cultivation technique, but it only trained his body and soul.
It was unable to create an aura.
He needed an aura cultivation technique, one that was better than the shadow aura cultivation technique he had learned in his previous life.
I need an aura cultivation technique. Aura cultivation technique? The instructors will teach you that during basic training. It was true. The cultivation technique taught during basic training was better than average among the continent. However, it wasn't enough.
In order to restore Sylvia's position and cut off Dara's head, he needed a better cultivation technique.
I need a better aura cultivation technique. I want you to bestow me with one equivalent to the bronze tablet. Glenn closed his eyes.
Raon kept thinking it, but Glenn was less expressive with his emotions than he was, and he had been an assassin. His nickname of cold-blooded really did suit him well.
Snap.
When he flicked his fingers, his eyes still closed, the floor of the Lord's manor began to tremble.
Rumble. Golden flame appeared from the ground. From the spiral flame, a circular bookshelf soared upward endlessly. This is... Raon's eyes widened.
The bookshelf was enormous enough to reach the audience chamber's high ceiling, and books of assorted colors and shapes were placed between each divider.
This is one of Sieghart's bookshelves. If you put your hand at the center, the book you need the most right now will come out. I see.
Raon calmed himself down and approached the bookshelf. It was so tall that looking up at it made his neck hurt, and there were so many books that they could be called countless. I just need something better than the shadow aura cultivation technique. He put his hand on the bookshelf, wishing for a better aura cultivation technique than the shadow one.
Rumble. The bookshelf vibrated and the books trembled as if they were cold.
The bookshelf rotated for a bit, then stopped.
Pang.
The first book from the first partition, which couldn't even be seen properly, flew out and opened.
Whap! Whap!
It emitted a golden light so bright that he couldn't even open his eyes.
What is this?
Glenn Sieghart, who was watching the scene, suddenly stood up, breaking the armrest of the throne in the process.
Chapter 22.
What is this book?
Raon swallowed, looking at the burning book.
Despite being so worn out that it looked like it would crumble into pieces, it was gleaming with a magnificent golden light, brightening up the audience chamber.
Whir!
Like a flower petal announcing the end of summer, the book drifted down and touched Raon's fingertip.
Despite being on fire, it wasn't hot.
Instead, it held the warmth of a human's body temperature.
10,000 flames cultivation?
Reading the words on the cover, he tried to open the book.
At that moment, the pages started turning on their own and the book started to burn more fiercely. Shatter.
Once it reached the final page, the book turned to ash.
They scattered, like used firewood. Ha!
Raon tried to grab the disappearing book, but it was pointless. The paper was reduced to powder, and the flame was extinguished into nothing but smoke.
What is this?
As he stood there, unable to comprehend the situation, a message appeared.
10,000 flame cultivation. You have faced an eternal flame.
You remember the 10,000 flame cultivation.
As soon as the message finished, his head started to throb as if thunder had struck it. Hop.
It felt like someone had thrust a huge needle into his brain. His knees faltered from a pain greater than that caused by Wrath's mental attack.
Huff.
Thankfully, the pain faded quickly, and he managed to avoid falling.
Young master.
Ren, who was next to him, came to support him.
I'm fine.
Thanking him, he put strength into his wobbling legs.
What did you just do?
I don't know, either.
But he remembered.
He could recall the contents of the 10,000 flame cultivation, which had been reduced to powder and disappeared.
Raon Sieghart.
He raised his head to the owner of the slightly trembling voice. Glenn was staring at him with wide eyes. It was an expression that he'd never seen before.
Raon couldn't tell if he looked angry or flustered.
What have you just done?
I don't know either.
But I remember the contents of the cultivation technique that disappeared from my hand.
What was the name of the book?
It was 10,000 Flames Cultivation.
Hearing Raon's response, Glenn closed his eyes.
After standing as motionlessly as a statue for a while, he opened his eyes.
He didn't look flustered anymore. Did you say you remember the content?
Yes, sir.
Then it's fine.
Glenn waved his hand with his usual cold-hearted expression. You've received the reward for returning the bronze tablet.
You should leave now. Raon glanced at Ren.
He looked bewildered, but quickly changed into his usual smiling face.
Understood. Raon nodded and stepped backward to leave the audience chamber. Glenn and Ren stayed immobile until he left completely. Sigh.
He couldn't understand what had just happened.
Did the system grant my mind the ability to memorize the 10,000 flames cultivation?
The system increases your memory and thought processing ability, but it can't force knowledge into your brain.
Rath's voice also sounded puzzled.
Walking through the corridor in the Lord's Manor, he mentally skimmed through the 10,000 flames cultivation.
He realized it immediately.
The 10,000 flames cultivation was a cultivation technique far more profound and meticulous than the shadow aura cultivation technique.
Moreover,
the 10,000 flames cultivation didn't only contain an aura cultivation technique, but also a swordsmanship technique and information about the ancient world. If he learned the 10,000 flames cultivation technique engraved in his memory properly, he would reach a level beyond that of his previous life.
But why did he give this to me?
The 10,000 flames cultivation was too valuable to be exchanged for a mere bronze tablet.
Never mind a silver tablet, a gold tablet wasn't even enough for it. He couldn't understand why Glenn had given it to him. Why are you worrying so much when you've already received it? That's true. There was no way someone like Glenn would make him return whatever he gave out, and he couldn't return it if he asked, anyway. Let's go back.
Since he'd only obtained the knowledge, he wanted to return and start cultivating immediately.
Raon started running towards the annex building as soon as he left the Lord's Manor.
His eyes were filled with excitement as he ran at full speed. The audience chamber was filled with heavy silence after Raon had left.
My lord.
Was the cultivation technique that the young master Raon received?
Yes.
It was used by that person. Glenn nodded, looking at the empty space on the first partition of the bookshelf.
For him to take the 10,000 flames cultivation.
In the history of Ziggurat, no one had managed to take out nor read the first clan leader's cultivation technique. That technique was the 10,000 flames cultivation that Raon had just received. Glenn had brought out the first bookshelf to grant him a cultivation technique equivalent to a silver tablet, instead of a bronze tablet. He'd never imagined that he would take the 10,000 flames cultivation.
Gulp.
Ren swallowed hard, looking at the ashes that were all that remained of the book containing the cultivation technique. If this matter becomes known, young Master Raon and Lady Sylvia might be in danger.
You needn't worry.
No one knows about the 10,000 flames cultivation, but...
Glenn shook his head.
The existence of 10,000 flames cultivation was only known to those who'd already become the head of house.
Unless they thoroughly investigated the family's history, there was no way anyone would know about it. Then, what about the book having completely disappeared? That's fine too, since it has been handed down to another person. Raon said he remembered the content of the cultivation book.
It was a mysterious phenomenon, but everything would be fine as long as it was handed down. But the 10,000 cultivation technique is passed down to the Ziggurat's head of house.
It couldn't be used, anyway. If it wasn't for that child, it would have ended up rotting away. He was actually surprised.
No, to be more precise, he was awestruck.
However, since it was Raon who manifested a golden flame during the judgment ceremony, he felt that Raon was its rightful owner. Since he obtained the first head's cultivation technique, the young Master Raon will become more powerful than anyone else. That's not true. Glenn slowly shook his head. Talent and how hard you study martial arts are both important to become strong. However, the most important aspect is the kind of person he is.
No matter how powerful the martial art one studies, they cannot surpass a strong human. The reason that Glenn kept organizing the judgment ceremony, even after surpassing the demonic wall, was to give adequate advice to talented children.
Glenn wasn't judging children's futures simply by their talents.
I beg your pardon. I was so surprised that I made a mistake. Ren nodded, placing his hand over his chest. Glenn was always saying that the person is more important than the talent, ever since he'd reached a new level of martial arts. Although, others in the family only cared about talent and the study of martial arts.
Change is coming. Glenn pressed it against the back of his throne.
The 10,000 cultivation, which had never allowed itself to be handed down, and the golden flame that had appeared only once in the history of the family.
Raon had them both. Raon Ziggurat. Glenn couldn't openly love him, despite Raon being his grandson.
And yet, that child was about to bring many changes to the family.
It's going to be fun watching him, If time allowed. Glenn closed his eyes, swallowing those words. Raon entered his room as soon as he returned. He had told everyone to not enter his room, but he'd locked the door just in case. So paranoid. You should know, too. I might die if I get distracted while cultivating aura. It was fine after a certain level had been reached. However, if someone touched him before his cultivation stabilized, it could cause big trouble. That was the reason that he didn't cultivate the Ring of Fire until he went to sleep in his personal bed when he was younger. You shouldn't distract me, either. Humph. Are you planning to? Only once. A smile showed up from the blue flame. Once? The King of Essence will interrupt you only once while you are doing that cultivation, or whatever. That could cause my body to become disabled before you can take it over. It doesn't matter. A scornful laugh, similar to a beast's growl, could be heard from Wrath. You won't be able to overcome it, but the King of Essence can revive a body even if its limbs are cut off and the energy center decimated. Wrath's evil voice sent chills down his spine. The moment you become disabled and give up on everything is going to be the King of Essence's opportunity. As I expected, you are. Raon realized it once again. Wrath wasn't an ally. He was a demon from Devilldom, and the incarnation of Wrath, ready to eat away his mind and body whenever he got the chance. So, are you only doing it once? You already know that the King of Essence doesn't lie. I will only interrupt you once before you finish learning that cultivation technique. I have no choice, then. Raon rubbed his wrist. Wrath wasn't going to listen even if he told him not to, so he had no choice but to accept it. Tremble in fear every day. You won't know when the King of Essence will start to attack. Wrath's voice was overly excited. He sounded overjoyed by his ability to tease him for once. That's such a small thing to be happy about as a king. It was funny that he was so happy about such a trivial matter when he kept childishly referring to himself as the King of Essence and took pride in being a monarch of Devilldom and the King of Wrath. However, Wrath's interruption was going to be dangerous, despite it only happening once. The 10,000 Flames cultivation was a cultivation technique that absorbed nature's mana and accumulated aura in the energy field. If he were interrupted at an important moment, his mana circuit or energy field could break. It would disable him. And it was especially dangerous for Raon, with all the ice in his mana circuit. But I cannot falter. Considering Wrath's personality, he was going to push more strongly if he noticed any weakness. No matter the result, he had to stay strong. All right. Try it, then. Hiding his thoughts, Raon showed a relaxed smile. Let's see how long you can keep up that arrogant expression. You will have to see for the rest of your life. I want to break your mind right now. Try it. That sounds like free stats to me. Damn insect. Still wet behind the ears. Doesn't lose a single argument. This insect is always open, so come at me anytime. Coo. Raon sat on the bed, waving his hand dismissively. Wrath screamed, exploding in anger, but he was completely ignored. If he has a brain at all, he isn't going to interfere right away. Breathing slowly, Raon closed his eyes. Inhaling nature's mana, he filled his body with fresh air. He then exhaled the murky air from his mana circuit. There are similarities. The flow of 10,000 Flames cultivation and Ring of Fire shared similarities, as their name suggested. Thinking positively, Raon settled the inhaled mana inside his mana circuit. The flow of 10,000 Flames cultivation started from his right wrist. It was an energy as fierce as fire and as haughty as water, all at the same time. Whirr! The heated mana ran through his body. The ice remaining in his mana circuit was swept away by that majestic flow. I can't miss this, either. It would have been a waste to throw away the pure ice, so he brought it up to his energy center along with the energy from the 10,000 Flames cultivation. Whirr! Upon reaching the energy center, the energy from the 10,000 Flames cultivation scattered in vain. I guess that's normal. Acquiring the 10,000 Flames cultivation in one single attempt would have been unnatural. Once using the flow of the 10,000 Flames cultivation felt like breathing to him, the flow would naturally accumulate in his energy center. Moreover,
He was absorbing the ice from his mana circuit, on top of the energy from the 10,000 flames cultivation.
That meant that his water resistance was going to grow quickly, as well. Ha! Exhaling the heated air after finishing one rotation, Raon opened his eyes. Fire attribute, huh?
Having only one attribute is a drawback, but it's an excellent cultivation technique.
You say foolish things sometimes. What?
That's the problem with those who don't learn the attribute properly.
A single attribute that is properly mastered isn't any weaker than a well-rounded user.
Back in Devildom, the story of the King of Essence freezing an entire castle with icy air was spread throughout history. Ignoring wrath as he started to brag about his past, he focused on what he said before.
A properly mastered single attribute. He was correct.
Someone who sloppily learned a single attribute was considered half-qualified, but upon reaching a certain level, they were considered as an absolute being. He could tell from cultivating only once. The 10,000 flames cultivation was special. It didn't lose at all to the legendary Ring of Fire.
I have to learn it properly.
Deciding that he would dedicate everything to learning the 10,000 flames cultivation for a while, he stood up.
Before that. Are you taking care of it now?
Yes.
It's not a coincidence that they are visiting us every day.
Raon's red eyes glowed like those of a death god.
It was time to take care of business. Judiel was a new maid, one who had started working in the annex building 1 month before.
Thanks to her good impression, cheerful personality, and efficient work, she quickly became trusted by the residents of the annex building. However, after finishing the daily chores, she told people that she was going to rest. Instead, she climbed the trees in the garden to spy into Raon's room.
He's talking to himself again.
Judiel narrowed her eyes, watching Raon mumbling to himself. It wasn't often, but he sometimes talked to himself and stared into thin air. She'd heard that he had always been sick, so she thought that was the reason. When Raon stopped talking to the air and sat down with his eyes closed, the flow of mana around him suddenly changed. He had meditated like that many times before, but it was the first time that the mana started to swirl around him. As expected, he learned an aura cultivation technique from the Lord's Manor. It looked like Raon had used his bronze tablet to learn an aura cultivation technique.
The flow of mana was extremely fierce, meaning it was a pretty powerful cultivation technique. This has to be reported.
Judiel climbed down the tree after Raon opened his eyes and turned the light off in his room. She went to the small lake at the end of the garden and took out the paper and pencil hidden underground. She wrote down everything Raon had done and everything she managed to learn since she had entered the annex building. Mysteriously, the letters on the paper disappeared as soon as she wrote them, and it looked like nothing was ever written on it.
This is such a depressing job. Judiel sighed.
In order to survive, she was reporting information about a child that could be used against him, and it was making her feel empty.
But it has to be done. The bitterness only lasted for a moment.
As long as she had something to protect, she had no choice in the matter. That fact filled her empty heart.
Tap. Judiel folded the paper to the size of a thumbnail and set afloat on the lake. The paper was going to reach Karun Zieghart by the next morning. Then I shall return, ah.
She suddenly stopped as she rose. The cold feeling of steel touching the back of her neck sent her heart pounding. You will die if you open your mouth. As she was looking around in a panic, a cold voice came from behind her.
You will die if you move.
Her hair stood on end at the sound of the voice, which seemed to contain death.
Lower your eyes and look at the lake. Following the voice's instruction, she lowered her eyes and looked at the lake. Ah! Raon Zieghart's red eyes were floating above the dark lake, reflecting the night sky. Chapter 23. Gulp.
Judiel swallowed harshly.
Why? Why is that boy here?
She couldn't understand why Raon Zieghart, who should have been sleeping, was standing behind her with a sword pointed in her direction.
Ugh.
She wanted to try and grasp the situation, but she couldn't even breathe, let alone try to think, when she saw the red eyes reflected in the lake. She felt like her heart was being crushed, as if she was meeting the eyes of a murderer that had taken hundreds and thousands of lives. I know someone has been observing me since the day I returned to the annex building.
Hup. Since the day he returned.
That meant that he'd noticed her gaze from the very beginning.
No. No way.
She had been trained as a spy since childhood. That was why she was confident in her ability to hide her presence better than anyone else. There was no way a mere child had discovered her identity and caught her off guard.
Open your mouth. Ah.
Raon's words weren't a suggestion, but an order.
Judiel trembled and opened her mouth.
Gawk. His finger pushed past her parted lips and forced something down her throat.
Kaya. She screamed.
A pain, like an awl piercing her esophagus and stomach, shot through her.
She sniffled.
Her stomach felt like she had just swallowed flames, to a point that she felt the urge to peel away her belly.
Splash. Leaving Judiel, who was writhing in pain, Raon entered the lake and brought back the dark blue paper.
Rustle.
Raon's eyes darkened as he unfolded the paper. This isn't normal paper.
Hup.
Judiel shut her mouth.
Despite the agonizing pain, she wasn't going to yield. Her pride as a spy wouldn't allow it.
Raon Sieghart nodded after staring into her eyes for a while.
Water.
Earth.
Fire.
Wind.
He suddenly started naming the different elements. He appeared to be looking for a way to investigate the paper's content, but she couldn't understand why he was speaking aloud.
Sunlight. Moonlight. The answer was moonlight, but Judiel didn't react.
Biting her tongue, she endured the stomach-rending pain.
So, it was moonlight.
Ha! She felt like her heart was jumping out of her mouth. Raon Sieghart had said the correct answer immediately after meeting her eyes.
WH what? How? She was just enduring the pain. How was he able to determine the secret of the paper, despite her refusal to show any reaction? He turned the paper over and placed it under the light from the moon for a while, then began to read. This is a very thorough investigation. Who were you going to send this to?
Ugh.
Raon asked his question with a blank expression. Judiel was now more scared than agonized.
The strangling fear was hurting her back.
Aries Sieghart. He didn't press her for an answer. Instead, he said the name of Glenn Sieghart's first daughter. Karun Sieghart, Denier.
It was Karun Sieghart.
Huff. Judiel started shouting, unable to hold back anymore. Who? Who are you?
Her chin trembled in fear of the unknown.
WH what is this child? Managing one's expressions and endurance were the first things taught to a spy.
It was impossible for a mere child to discern information just from looking into her eyes.
Raon Sieghart kept gazing down at her without saying anything.
Judiel bowed down, trying to avoid his menacing glare, and came to a realization.
Wait. What if he wasn't reading my expression?
His eyes weren't checking her expression. He was just calmly looking at her.
No way.
The agonizing pain ripping through her stomach. The way Raon was reading her thoughts. The connection between the two snapped in place in her thoughts.
Did you feed me a rage worm? You know about rage worms? Raon Sieghart's expression changed for the first time.
He was jeering at her, at the way she knew about it, despite being a mere spy.
But that was enough of an answer. Coup. She felt like throwing up. No way. A rage worm.
Rage worm was one of the worst curses in the world. By making it enter the body of a target, the caster could discern not only the target's location, but also their thoughts. The worst part was the fact that, no matter how far away they were, the caster could kill the target whenever they wanted, accompanied with agonizing pain.
That's the only possibility. It's a rage worm.
The agonizing pain, and the way Raon Sieghart was reading her mind, made her realize that what entered through her mouth was certainly a rage worm.
How? How did you use a rage worm?
She doubted how a 13-year-old child that had been sick his entire life could use a rage worm, but that was the only possibility she could think of.
That shouldn't be what's important to you right now.
Raon Sieghart approached her, swaying the paper in front of her eyes.
Ugh. He was right. Since a rage worm had already entered her body, she couldn't run away or disobey.
Since you sent this letter to Karun Sieghart, You must be a spy from the Central Martial Palace.
And the operation must have started 7 months ago, after the judgment ceremony. Judiel's eyes widened. He was right once again. She had come to the annex building 7 months ago, after the judgment ceremony. It confirmed, once again, that he had used a rage worm against her. You have investigated very thoroughly. Not only about me, but also about my mother, Helen, and the other maids. Raon Zieghart smiled, looking at the letters shining under the moonlight. The bloodlust contained in his expression drenched Judiel's back in cold sweat. I've offended somebody I never should have. She'd thought it was an easy mission. The annex building didn't have any warriors, and only kind people lived in it. As she only needed to gather information about the young Raon and the disabled Sylvia, she thought it would be simple, easy. It wasn't. There was a monster living in the annex building, and it was an extremely murderous one. Looking into his red eyes made her want to hang herself. Ku. She pulled at the flesh on her arm. The pale bloodlust coming from him made her feel like her face was getting torn apart, and the organ where the rage worm resided felt like it was going to explode. I will change the content. I'll deliver a false. You don't need to. Raon Zieghart lowered the paper. The letters that used to reflect moonlight went invisible. After folding the paper once again, he set it afloat on the lake. WHY. Even if you change the information now, Karun will eventually learn about me. It will only result in him realizing your incompetence. Hop. Raon knelt and met her eyes. Meeting his bloody red eyes, her hands and feet trembled. How often do you report? The periodical report is once every 2 weeks. Since I won against Bien today, the period will become shorter. It should change to 1 week. Ah, yes. Judiel nodded. She'd also thought the same thing. You are a double agent from now on. Report him with any information that he will soon discover anyway, hide undisclosed and important information. On the other hand, bring me valuable information from his side. Understood. She nodded unconditionally, since she couldn't do anything to get out of her current terrifying situation. I'm looking forward to some useful information the next time I return. After saying that, he disappeared into the darkness. Ugh. However, Judiel still felt like his red eyes were glaring into her heart. Plop. Unable to stop her legs from trembling, she collapsed on the ground. The pain. The pain had disappeared at some point. It looked like Raon Zieghart had controlled the rage worm. Monster. She couldn't even think about disobeying him. There was an existence more terrifying than the death itself hiding in the darkness of the annex building. Ugh. Judiel bit her lip and ran to her lodgings. The fear left behind by Raon was deeply engraved in her heart, like goosebumps sprouting on her neck. When did you summon a rage worm? It wasn't a rage worm. Raon, who had returned to his room, shook his head. What? I fed her with a poison, making her feel intense pain temporarily. He'd fallen victim to a rage worm in his previous life, but he couldn't even remember it. Obviously, he didn't know how to cast it. What he'd fed Judiel was just a poison used for torture. I wouldn't use something like a rage worm, even if I had it. He didn't have any intention of using such a dreadful curse. If he'd had the worm in front of him, he would have crushed it under his feet. Then where did you get that poison? I made it. So earlier, when you went to the kitchen and warehouse. That's right. Poison recipes were already in his memory, so he just modified one a bit to make a poison using the materials he had around him. Wait. Earlier, you read her thoughts. Yes, I did. How could you do that without using a rage worm? Some of them were guesses, and others were from looking at her condition. Her condition? But didn't she maintain the same expression the entire time? Rath's blue flame wavered. He couldn't seem to understand how he'd gotten the information from looking at her condition. I can tell. He'd lived as an assassin for over 20 years in his previous life. He was also experienced with torture, so it wasn't really difficult for him to read Judiel's thoughts.
Even in Devildom, the King of Essence has never seen anything like a 13-year-old that knows how to engrave fear into people.
He was right.
If he didn't have the experience from his previous life as an assassin, he wouldn't have realized that Judiel was gathering information. He also couldn't have used the same method against her. When he thought about it, he realized his previous life was quite useful.
Anyway, it was Karun Zighart. Raon repeated Karun's name, sitting on his bed.
He could guess the reason he'd sent Judiel. He must have wanted to obtain information about him because of how he'd acted at the judgment ceremony.
But he made the incorrect decision. Just observing him was fine, but he also included Sylvia, Helen, and every maid in the annex building as the targets of his observation.
That was the worst mistake he could have made.
But why didn't you change the information? Wrath approached while tilting his head. She'd written that you managed to overcome the ice even more, and obtained an excellent aura cultivation technique. Shouldn't you have erased it? That's trivial information. I need to give away that much if I want to trick him.
Brushing his finger over the bedsheet, he continued. If she keeps sending real information about me to the Central Martial Palace, she will become trusted.
If I send false information after sending useless, but real, information,
I can create an opportunity to dispose of Karun Zighart.
Ha! Wrath gasped.
He realized Raon really was abnormal to be able to make such a plan in such a short amount of time.
You are obviously not 13 years old. You are like a 100-year-old python on the inside. Just a python?
Raon swayed his finger with a mocking smile at Wrath.
I'm not a python. I'm an assassin. The best assassin. Runan Sullian didn't stop training, not even after she returned home.
She couldn't stay still, as she kept recalling the movements that Raon Zighart had shown on the testing day.
However, I can't.
When she trained with the equipment in the house, the weight she could lift had clearly gotten smaller compared to when she was at the training ground.
It wasn't just the equipment. Long-distance running and other stamina training didn't go well, either.
She pondered about it, but there was only one answer.
Raon Zighart. Raon wasn't there.
Since Raon, who always used to be next to her, wasn't with her anymore, she wasn't in her usual condition.
Since Raon's fragrance had gotten even better, she would sniff it unconsciously. She thought that was one of the reasons why. I need him. Runan Sullian nodded and left the training ground. Runan?
Rokan Sullian, the head of the Sullian family, furrowed his brow as he watched Runan leave the training ground.
We were going to train together. Where are you going? To Raon. Raon? Do you mean Raon Zighart? MHM. Why are you going to him? And why now, when we were supposed to train together?
Rokan Sullian stuttered, losing his usual composure. His hands trembled, because Runan said she wanted to go to Raon when he finally managed to make time to play with his youngest daughter.
Because of the scent, and the training. Ha! He couldn't understand what she was saying. I'm going. Runan dusted off her clothes and left the training ground. Well, wait. You can train here, with your father. I have to train there. Runan resolutely shook her head. You keep saying that you have to go. Did Raon do something to you? Something?
She blankly lowered her head and thought about what happened with Raon.
He helped me.
Raon hadn't directly helped her, but she could train more efficiently whenever she was next to him, so she was definitely assisted by him.
Yes, he did. Coo. Raon, that bastard. Rokan grinded his teeth. How dare you threaten my daughter? Rokan added his imagination to Runan's short answer to draw a picture. The picture of his poor daughter, trembling in fear from Raon's threats, was embedded in his brain. Oh, no. My lord. You can't be here. Today's tasks can't be postponed, no matter what. Bring my sword immediately.
Rokan shouted at the butler that came looking for him.
Eek? SW sword? Runan, I'm coming too. I can't let him be. Rokan blared. He looked like he was going to destroy the Zighart's annex building. Ha! Ha! The butler opened his mouth wide. His head was hurting already because of the mess that he was going to create. What are you doing? I told you to bring me my sword. PL please, wait. My lord. Please talk to me. I don't need to talk. I only need a sword and punishment. Ha! The butler turned his head towards Runan. She was staring at Roken with a blank expression that made it impossible to know what she was thinking. He knew that the quiet lady wasn't going to resolve the situation. That person is the only one who can resolve this. He shook his head and went into the mansion to look for the madam, instead of a sword. So. You are saying that the young Master Raon helped you with your training, rather than threatening you. Correct? MHM. Runan nodded at Clara's question. Dear. Clara's purple eyes glowed coldly as she turned to the left. No. I obviously thought she was threatened. She only said she was going, so anyone would have misunderstood. Yep. Anyone. Roken, who had been about to charge without thinking, was now crouching in a corner. He was bent nearly in half. Stop talking and get back to work. No, I was going to play with Renan today. Hush. Oh, okay. I'm going to come and check on you later, so you'd better finish your work by then. Yes. Don't worry. Roken went back into the mansion, slumping in disappointment with that huge body of his. Runan. MHM? Did you thank the young Master Raon? I did when he gave me a cracker. How about when he helped you with your training? I didn't. Ha ha. Runan shook her head and Clara smiled as she brushed her hair. Then tell him thank you the next time you see him. But father. Father told me to not start talking to men. Aha. Clara smiled. The butler, who was looking at the smile, became certain that Roken was going to be scolded the whole night. Forget about what he said. It doesn't matter whether it's a man or a woman. It's a common courtesy to give thanks when you are helped. Do you understand? MHM. Now then. Do you want to train with your mother today, instead of your father? MHM. Returning to the training ground with Clara, Runan remembered Raon's calm face. I'm going to say thank you. She was slightly flustered when she thought about talking to him first. Chapter 24. Raon opened his eyes, feeling the sunlight enter through the window. It's difficult. He skimped on sleep during his break to cultivate more, but he didn't manage to create an aura. This isn't a common cultivation method. He'd felt it when he saw Glenn's expression and when he examined the 10,000 flames cultivation engraved in his memory, but it definitely wasn't a martial technique that could be exchanged for a bronze tablet. Let alone a silver tablet, even dozens of golden tablets wouldn't have been enough. Why did he just give it to me? He couldn't understand why he gave him such an excellent aura cultivation method. After all, he thought Glenn hated him and Sylvia. The most surprising part was that he didn't do anything when the book was reduced to powder, and Raon was the only one able to have that knowledge. Is there a problem with this aura cultivation method? He thought Glenn had probably given it to him because it wasn't a complete cultivation method, or it had some kind of flaw somewhere. He carefully checked the content of the 10,000 flames cultivation in his memory. I don't see any problems. He didn't notice anything in particular, but he thought he should be careful, just in case. That's not the only thing you should be careful about. Wrath suddenly burst from the ice flower bracelet. If you don't watch out for the King of Essence, your soul and body will be engulfed by Wrath. So be it. Raon nodded at Wrath, who was chuckling. That is an arrogance not even seen in Devildom. I will definitely shut down your arrogance this time. I keep telling you. Do it if you can. Raon waved his hand dismissively and left the room. He couldn't show any weakness to Wrath. A serene mind. A mind as calm as the lake in the middle of the night, that was what he needed. Raon. Young Master Raon. Sylvia, Helen, and the maids were waiting in the entrance hall. You haven't been here for long enough. I couldn't talk to you enough, and you didn't eat enough. Sylvia teared up as she expressed her regrets. I can come back every weekend from now on. Unlike before, when he was a temporary trainee, as an official trainee he could return to the annex building during weekends. But the atmosphere became heavy. It looked like Sylvia's feelings had spread to the maids. I'll be back. Awkward situations and emotions like that were his Achilles heel. Raon quickly waved his hand and walked towards the exit of the annex building. As he opened the door, he met Judiel's eyes. She was sitting at the end of the line of maids. Huff! Judiel covered her mouth, about to scream. Her forehead was drenched in cold sweat, and she was shaking all over. She was the picture of someone overwhelmed by the monster they called fear. It looks like I won't need to worry. That was what he'd wanted, but he didn't like dominating people with fear. He thought he should properly accept her as his subordinate once she brought him valuable information from the Central Martial Palace. You are such a monstrous guy. Wrath sounded like he was sighing as he spoke, all while watching Judiel's expression. Being called a monster by an actual monster isn't too bad. What a compliment. Raon slightly smiled and made his way towards the 5th training ground for the first time in a week. Raon arrived at the training ground 10 minutes earlier than the scheduled time. The number of children had visibly decreased. Out of the 160 people, only 42 remained. It made the training ground look half empty. The fact that only a quarter remained showed that Rimmer was meticulous about results, despite his usual frivolous appearance. Raon Zighart. He looks different again, somehow. The way the children looked at Raon had clearly changed. 6 months ago, they looked at him with mockery, ridicule, and a little bit of compassion. Now, however, they looked at him with jealousy, surprise, and admiration. However, Raon wasn't interested in them. As he was warming up with only the 10,000 flames cultivation in mind, he heard light steps approaching, followed by a nasally sound similar to sniffing. Those steps. When he turned back, Runan was there with her vacant eyes, just as he'd expected. Now that girl is following you around while sniffing. I thought she was a cat, not a dog. I'm not sure. She looks like a puppy and a cat at the same time. Raon awkwardly met Runan's eyes. She approached a step closer to him than usual before stopping. Thank you. Ha! He didn't understand why she suddenly thanked him. After thanking him, Runan's eyes started to resemble a cat waiting for food, sparkling unusually. Okay. Raon responded with a puzzled expression and Runan stepped back after bowing slightly. The distance between them returned to the usual. She clenched her fist as if she'd accomplished something. Why did you suddenly thank me? Because I'm grateful. Ah. Runan tilted her head as if Raon was the weird one. It looked like he wasn't going to get an answer even if he kept asking her. What? What is she trying to do? I don't know, either. It was his first time seeing a child like Runan in both his past and current lives. Looking at her blank purple eyes made him space out, like he was watching a bonfire. But since she wasn't disturbing him, nor picking a fight with him, he couldn't really do anything about it. After all, she'd thanked him even if he didn't know the reason. Is it because I'm not familiar with emotions? Wrath was also confused, but a psychopath like him couldn't be used as a standard. So, this is how I learn about being flustered. Raon sighed. He couldn't find the answer no matter how much he thought, so he shook his head to return to his senses. Young master. Dorian ran up to him, green hair fluttering like wings. It has been a long time. He bowed at a 90-degree angle, as if he were bowing to an instructor. Oh, how have you been? I thought I would die. I already felt like I'd die when I was just a temporary trainee, so I can't imagine how difficult it will be now that I'm an official TR trainee. I kept having nightmares. Ugh. Dorian kept talking without waiting for the answer. He was a weirdo for being scared instead of being proud of becoming an official trainee. But I'm glad that young Master Raon is the top trainee. If young Master Ban was the top, then I wouldn't have been able to breathe. It would have been better that I failed the exam.
When Dorian was saying that, Bayan entered the training ground along with the collaterals.
Dorian collapsed under Bayan's cold gaze. Hick!
Dorian started to hiccup while trembling all over.
Raon Zighart.
Without paying attention to the scared Dorian, Bayan approached Raon.
I admit my defeat from 1 week ago. I showed everyone my disgraceful side. I'm sorry.
Bayan bowed at a 90-degree angle without any hesitation.
Eek! Lord Bubun.
The trainees around them opened their mouths wide in surprise.
However,
Bayan's eyes were burning when he raised his head.
I didn't give up.
I will stand in front of you again, no matter what it takes.
I won't withdraw, nor will I give up. Of course, I have no intention of losing to you, either.
After Raon, Bayan also pointed his finger at Runan.
He then walked to the left.
I thought I'd die.
Dorian stood while trembling, as he was chilly. What shall I do now? Shall I go ahead and beg?
His eyes were moving twice as fast as before. It was curious how he could still stay conscious in that state.
You don't need to worry. Raon shook his head. Bayan was only looking at him and Runan. He didn't seem to be paying attention to anyone else.
He still doesn't know his position, even after getting beaten up.
Follow him and pluck out his eyes, right now. That's pretty amazing on its own.
Accepting his own mistake and asking for a rematch wasn't an easy feat to achieve for a 13-year-old child. It was a behavior befitting the direct line of the prestigious Zighart family.
I don't care if that's amazing or not.
The King of Essence didn't like it, so kill him.
Raon snorted.
When one nuisance finally closed his mouth, the other started talking. It looked like silence was never going to happen. Swoosh! As he was flexing his ankle and ignoring Wrath's anger, a green wind burst over the walls.
Sorry, I'm late. I overslept a bit because I was drinking yesterday.
Rimmer appeared alongside the wind. He smiled awkwardly while scratching the back of his head, his hair resembling a bird's nest.
Snap! Someone could be heard grinding their teeth. It was Bayan.
How dare he make the King of Essence wait?
That arrogant pointy-eared bastard has finally gone insane. Tear off his ears, now. Wrath was boiling with uncontrollable anger. It looked like Bayan and Wrath could become friends. Rimmer walked onto the platform, humming. Did you rest well? He waved his hand. The way he was faltering made it seem like he wasn't completely awake. Yes.
On the other hand, the children's shouts were loud and strong.
First of all, I congratulate you on becoming official trainees.
Thank you. As you must be already aware, those who failed were given the chance to join the 6th training ground if they wanted. Don't be too disappointed if your friend dropped out. Rimmer smiled as he told them that they could meet with their friends again later. We are going to start the official training from today onward.
The overall structure is going to be the same.
You will have to surpass your limits throughout the training, whether it's your mind, stamina, or martial arts. Not only is it the fastest method, it also allows you to reach the highest peak. He concluded by saying that there was no end to basic training. However, he didn't sound all that convincing with the lazy display he put on, what with his constant yawning.
A few more training programs will be added from now on. The first is the aura cultivation method. Starting tomorrow, you will cultivate aura during daybreak and evening training.
Since it was well known that the best time to cultivate aura was at daybreak and evening, everyone nodded. We will also start the swordsmanship and fist technique training that you've been waiting for.
Oh. Finally.
The children's eyes shone like jewels as he spoke about the swordsmanship and fist technique.
And,
just as Rimmer was about to continue, the training ground door burst open.
Whoosh!
Standing in the doorway, the origin of the dusty wind, was a girl in her mid-teens. Her ebony hair was flowing over her left shoulder, and her eyes, clearly separated into black and white, shone like pearls. Her skin was as white as the snow.
Oh.
The boys on the training ground couldn't close their mouths because of her graceful figure, so different from Runan's.
However, Oh, fuck. Why is it so hard to open the door? The swear word coming from her mouth made the boy's jaws drop for a different reason. You're finally here. Rimmer smirked and pointed to the approaching girl. I wasn't in charge of her, but she is a failed trainee from the last batch. Since you will be training together from now on, give your greetings for now. I'm Martha. The girl that introduced herself as Martha frowned, chin raised. Despite her graceful appearance, her behavior wasn't any different from that of thug. Apparently, she is a kind girl despite looking like that, so if you can get along. Mind your own business, sir. Well, I guess. Rimmer laughed and shrugged his shoulders. On the other hand, the trainees' mouths were still wide open. Just warm yourselves up for today. We'll start regular training tomorrow. So? He glanced at each of the children and grinned. Run, at full speed. I saw that coming. When Raon was about to kick off after nodding, 3 shadows sprinted forward. They belonged to Runan, Bayan, and Martha. Yo young master. When he was about to start running after them, Dorian approached him. What do we do? That person is here. Do you know her? Do you not know about her? She is also from the direct line. Direct line? I don't remember seeing her at the judgment ceremony. Ah, she isn't a normal direct line. She was adopted because of her talent. Dorian told him that Martha was adopted as the daughter of Denier Zighart, the 3rd son of Glenn, and that she was adopted solely because of her talent. Talent, huh? Raon nodded, watching Martha run ahead of Bayan and Runan. She was 1 year older than them, but he could tell that her talent wasn't ordinary at all. From what I've been told, Lady Martha was the top trainee from the last batch, just like young Master Raon. Then why did she fail? She beat up. Huh? Dorian continued, his folded arms trembling. Not long after training began, she beat up 5 TR trainees until they were half dead. And there were 2 people from the direct line among them. 2 from the direct line. Be careful. Apparently, she has a bad personality. Raon nodded slightly and started running. Be careful? She should be careful of him. He had no intention of hiding his strength. If anyone challenged him, he would trample them. Huff. Raon exhaled violently once stamina training, which lasted until evening, was over. Ugh. I'm dying. I've only rested for 1 week, yet. Most of the trainees were groaning on the ground. Let's stop for today, since overdoing it will affect tomorrow's training. Thank you for your trouble. Thank you. The children bowed to Rimmer and the instructors before collapsing again. I've said this before, but the aura cultivation will start tomorrow. Since I'm going to distribute the cultivation book, those who haven't acquired an aura yet should come forward. As Rimmer gestured with his hand, books with a thickness of a pinky fingernail rose onto the platform. Don't be disappointed because it's a supplied cultivation book. The Rindan aura cultivation technique will work anywhere in the continent. While most of them didn't move, only a few trainees with commoner backgrounds came forward and accepted the cultivation books. Rimmer's gaze was directed at Raon. Despite not having any aura, he wasn't coming forth. Raon Zighart. Yes. I don't think you have any aura, either. I'm going to learn the aura cultivation technique that I've obtained recently. It looked like he'd obtained a cultivation book from the family head by exchanging his bronze tablet for it. He must have been given one equivalent or higher than a silver tablet. Since Glenn treasured Raon more than he pretended to, Rimmer was certain he gave him a cultivation technique better than Rindan. Those who have already learned an aura cultivation technique shall cultivate in their respective room at daybreak. Those who've received a cultivation book today, as well as Raon Zighart, shall come out here at daybreak tomorrow. Me, too? Raon tilted his head. Since you haven't learned an aura yet. Understood. Alright, then let's stop for today. Wait. I have something to say. Martha, who didn't have a single drop of sweat despite finishing stamina training, raised her hand. Who is the top trainee here?
She looked through everyone, with her hands on her waist.
It's me. Raon opened his mouth, facing Martha's black eyes.
The direct line and vassal families must all be dead to lose to a brat who doesn't even have an aura.
Laughing at Bian and Runan, she stood in front of Raon. I can't bear someone weaker than me standing above me. Cool air surrounded Martha's entire body. Let's fight.